Today on the PitchBook podcast, we have Dr. Rachel Carlsruh pitching Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well by Dr. Amy Edmondson. Batter up!
Rachel, welcome. It's good to have you.
Hi, it's fun to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well,
You
thanks
don't
for
know if
your
it's fun
time.
yet. We'll see if it's fun. You never know.
Whatever happens, I'm going to twist it around and make it fun.
Very good. Very good.
So you have a couple months ago, you were at our house, and you and we just started talking about books, and we're just kind of going back and forth, and I was like, okay, here's somebody who reads a lot, and it's just always fascinating to hear what people are reading, what what ideas they're kind of gaining from those books. So tell us a little bit about kind of your journey. You're a professor at Utah Valley University, and you have a background in educational psychology. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
What took you down that path to study that and like to go as far as becoming a doctor in educational psychology?
Yeah. So I started out as a math teacher. I taught in junior highs and high schools. Eventually, I ended up teaching at UVU, and I got like a really cool gig in their developmental math department, and I loved it. I loved teaching college students. So through a chain of events, we moved out of state, and I didn't have that job anymore. And when I came back, you had to at that point in time, I had a master's degree. I had like a math degree, I have a bachelor's in math, and then I had a master's degree in secondary education. When I came back, the system that kind of grandfathered people in with a master's degree was no longer in place. So in order for me to continue teaching at a university, I would have to go get my PhD. And I kind of felt like the world was my oyster at that point, because did I want to keep teaching math, or did I want to do something completely different? Did I want to get a PhD? I mean, what if I wanted to get it in like world religions or women's studies, or I wanted to just like think this through, what I really wanted to teach at the university level. And it just so happened that I met somebody who had done an educational psychology program, and I asked them what types of studies they did. And essentially they were interested in the parts of education, and they studied the parts of education that had always fascinated me, which are, how do people learn? How do you motivate people? How do interpersonal relationships affect learning? Of course, I'm interested in the systems level stuff too, but at the time, especially, I was very interested in individual learners and like the mental and emotional processes going on behind learning. And so then I went up to University of Utah, and they said, we'll take you. And I did it, and I shrugged my shoulders like it was no big deal. But throughout the process, I had 4 kids. I went through a divorce. COVID happened. It was a really, like, I was a hot mess. Like, it was hard. It was hard, but I finished it in 5 years. And this job at UVU for an educational psychology professor in the secondary education department came up, and it was like 100% made for me. So I actually like rushed my PhD. I was going to take 6 years. And as soon as that came up, I had already gathered the data for my dissertation. And my advisor was like, there's no way you're going to get this done. I'm like, I'm going to get this job and I'm going to get it done. So I did. And I'm there now at UVU, and I really love it.
So five years to get your doctorate.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And the shift from teaching math to kids to going to educational psychology, was that a big leap for you, or did the passion just kind of drive you through like, this is fun?
I mean, it wasn't a big leap in the types of students I taught, because I've been teaching adults for years already. And I also teach Thursday nights at the prison. I teach statistics for Salt Lake Community College. So I'm still teaching math in an adult setting. But I would say like, no, I'm like super hyped to be teaching this topic. It was nerve-wracking to move from like math to humanities. That's something that was like a really big leap in teaching. And I think the first semester I felt a little bit like, I thought I anticipated that I would be out of my element, but like it's 100% my element. I love it so much. It's like what I was made to do, I feel like, which is really rare to find a job like that. And I get that.
Not everybody finds their calling. That's awesome. So you've
Yeah.
got a book for us today, the
Yeah.
right kind of wrong. Tell us about it, and we'll just dive
Yeah,
in.
how did you find it, first of all? How did you discover? We always want to know, like, what was the impetus for picking up this book?
So one of my favorite podcasts is Hidden Brain. Are you Hidden Brain fans?
I've never heard of it.
I'm going to be.
Hidden
I can't
Brain
find mine,
is-
so yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, no, they're going to teach you where your brain is. In essence, that's kind of what it is. It really is a cognitive psychology podcast. And they have different topics about what are the things going on behind the scenes when we have behaviors or interactions that maybe seem confusing on their face. So I was listening to Hidden Brain about a week before you called and asked me to do this. And they had Amy Edmondson, the author of this book I read, they had her on the podcast, and they were talking about the art of failure and the art of learning from failure and the psychology behind why it's so difficult for us to embrace the likelihood, the very real probability that when we're doing something new and different, we're probably going to fail at it for a while until like we figure out how to do it, right? So this really connected with stuff that I try to teach my educational psychology students. I have an assignment they do called, and I just started it this semester, so I was trying to learn more about how to do it. And it's called Fail at Something. And the assignment is literally, I give them a task and they get an option of tasks, but there's no way that they could do it in the amount of time I've given them. You know, like a lower version of like, win the Nobel Prize with 10 hours of work. Like, you're never going to do that, right? So anyway, I was really fascinated with how what she was talking about seemed like a different twist, or maybe like further scaffolding to understand what we call growth mindset, which is like a huge thing in educational psychology. It's very like, I'm sure you've heard growth mindset talked about in the schools and stuff, and maybe even like in industry.
Is this the book, like the Dr. Carol Dweck's research? Okay.
Yeah. It's Carol Dweck's philosophy, and a lot of researchers in math education, like Joe Bowler, have taken it up. And so because I studied growth mindset and mathematics through Joe Bowler and these Carol Dweck philosophies, and I want my students to build that type of classroom for their students. When I heard about that, I thought, this isn't really like in my wheelhouse, because she's like a Harvard business person, and every time I read a business book, I feel like I'm being sold something. And so I don't usually like them, but I thought I need to read that and expand my knowledge of not just like, because I'm a believer in growth mindset, but also like, what does that look like in practice and in different situations and in different contexts? And so I really wanted to like push myself. So that's how I decided to buy this book. And I thought it'd be a good fit for this podcast.
So what is kind of in the nutshell, what is it about? Is it all about trying something and failing so that you can grow? I mean, give us an idea of what the book is kind of about.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand how she came to study this issue. She's like a Harvard person through and through. She got like this degree, that degree, this degree, that degree from Harvard. And then now she's like one of these Harvard best business professors of all time. And along her journey, she had some professors who were the people who literally came up with the term teamwork. Like, that's how influential they were. And they had studied how pilots often make mistakes under certain conditions. Due to a series of what we would call failures, these researchers back in like the 50s and 60s, their hypothesis like kept getting disproved. They had this hypothesis essentially that like, by the way, the reason I'm telling this is because a lot of the impetus for this book comes from the way researchers and scientists go about their work. She talks about that quite a bit. So her journey to get here was through a similar process. Anyway, in the 50s and 60s, these mostly probably men who were studying like what made pilots make mistakes, they would put these pilots in simulators. Their hypothesis was these pilots who were lacking sleep would do more poorly than the pilots who weren't, which seems like a pretty simple hypothesis. but they were finding like these exact opposite results, which is kind of a failure, right? Like you didn't get the result of the hypothesis you thought there was. Well, they went back to the drawing board and they realized that the pilots who were lacking sleep, it's because they put them in these simulators for 3 days and they were together for 3 days. And so they developed this camaraderie and they developed this way to like check each other. And so their teamwork, even though they were all exhausted, was a huge contributor in not making as many flaws, right? So then Amy Edmondson gets one of these people as her advisor, and she's like, here's what I'm going to do for my dissertation. I'm just going to take this little idea that teamwork leads to less errors and reduced errors, and I'm going to apply it to a hospital setting. So she had like all this accessibility to Harvard hospitals. She went in there, she found a team that she thought was like having a lesser amount of teamwork, and then she found a team that was having like more teamwork. And her hypothesis was flipped on its head. And she got the results back, and it looked like the teams who were better at teamwork actually had more error in their practice. And she's like, what? So again, like through the scientific process, she was in some sort of new territory, and it resulted in this failure. But what she did with this failure is she investigated it further. And she I don't know if she came up with the term or if she just used the term, but she came up with this term called psychological safety. And what she realized was the teams who had really great teamwork, there was a certain level of psychological safety there for them to report error, because these errors were mostly self-reported by the hospital. And if people weren't talking about it, the hospital might not have known about the errors, right? So it wasn't that those teams were committing more errors, it's that they felt safe to talk about the errors. So through this series of like scientific and research failures, she developed kind of these new ideas and these new hypotheses. So her contention is failure in certain circumstances is not only necessary, it's like the driving force of growth, right? But this is something we've known in industry and education for a while. Like she talks a lot about how in industry there's this like fail fast and fail well, or fail fast, fail hard, or I don't know, there's a lot of mantras in business.
These are all good. These are all good.
It's like fail fast, fail hard. And she's like, it's too simplistic. When you say fail fast, fail hard, it's as if you are making all failures have an equal level of importance, an equal level of good, not moral good necessarily, but like usefulness good, and that they're all equally grave or not grave. And she's like, this is not the case. Like there's a whole range of ways you can mess up out there. And what I want to do, and this is what she does in the book, she kind of like categorizes and classifies what types of failures exist, what types of failures we can mitigate for, and how. She gives like a bunch of really great ideas. Most of them are from psychology. So I was like buying into these ideas. And she also talks about how failing well can actually be done, and how we can actually tricks and tips, not just for individuals, but for systems and people who run systems, how they can build an environment where errors are reported so that they can be dealt with right away. Like maybe you two already know this, probably most people do, but Toyota, the founder of Toyota, had this brilliant way of people like pulling a cord as soon as they even thought something was wrong, right? And they said like 9 out of 10 or something like 11 out of 12 times, and I knew about this before, but she talks about this in the book in further detail, like 11 out of 12 times, it resulted in not having to stop the line. It was something that like really wasn't a problem, but nobody was ever shamed for that, right? Like they were celebrated for going on their intuition that something might be wrong. And that 1 out of 12 times where they actually stopped the line, they stopped waste, they stopped sending out products that would be sent back by the consumers, right? So her whole idea is like, how can we create systems, and how can we create families and schools and businesses, and not just within ourselves, but around us, that are failure resilient in important ways, but also like how to mitigate for what we call basic error in all ways. You know, like, I mean, even though you're never going to get rid of it 100%, like, how can you mitigate for it? And so that's kind of like, I mean, that's like the book cover. It was a 10-minute summary. Can you imagine? That's why they don't ask me to write like book cover summaries.
Well, now we don't need to read the book, so that's what's the great about this podcast.
No,
I have two.
I was trying to be great. Thank you.
I have two questions for you that I thought of that are more something I've noticed in my life. So I'm definitely happy to fail, and it's not a problem for me. But I'm very close to two perfectionists, and I wonder, does she, what can I gain from the book, or what can they gain from the book that will help them not be perfectionists? And then I'll let you answer that, and I have another question for you.
Okay. This is one part of the book where I spoke back to it, because she has this section about perfectionism, and it kind of starts, and this makes me a little bit wary as someone with a psychology background. She kind of starts by saying, don't be a perfectionist.
Sure.
And so, of course, I'm like, I don't think most people who are perfectionists like want to be a perfectionist.
No.
But it's interesting because let me go to that page really quick, because I wrote a bunch of notes like in my conversation with that page. Let me find it really quick. This is one of
I like that you
things.
talk to yourself while reading the book. That's great.
Well, I had like a conversation with the book. Perfectionism, page 225. I think I put like a laughy face on it, like, oh, great advice. Don't be a perfectionist.
So easy. Don't have anxiety. Don't, you know.
Oh, here it is. Look. So I wrote a word, but I'll tell you what it is. So it says resisting perfectionism. And so she talks in this book about, she calls it those suffering from perfectionism have a hard time trying something new because they can't tolerate that they might fail. She doesn't really honestly give a lot of advice other than resist it, which is a little bit frustrating to me. But the reason I wrote the word safety on the top is because another book we should talk about is Atlas of the Heart. It's Brene Brown's new book, and I've had my students read it for 2 semesters, and I love it. And she talks about perfectionism as a measure of protecting ourselves. So I thought about this, like, if perfectionism, because you get this idea in your head that all these bad things that happen to people in the world can be within my control if I just do better. Like, or the mistakes that I've made in the past, I can just like make up for those if I just do better. And so I had this thought, if people are being perfectionistic because of safety reasons, a lot of that has to do perhaps with the ways they have been received in their life when they've shared their imperfections. Maybe this is maybe a little bit hoobly-doobly, I don't know, but like going back to their childhood, like maybe when they saw their parents unable to admit mistakes or errors, when they themselves had something wrong, they felt maybe like the love was a little bit conditional, right? And so honestly, this is something for the rest of us. I feel like if we are in contact with someone who's a real perfectionist, I think the best thing we can do for them is make sure they understand they have the psychological safety to talk about and to talk about whatever they need to talk about it with us, even maybe if it's like, maybe it's something that worries us about them, instead of reacting with like, oh yeah, but your life is fine, and why are you worried? Like, we present a safe place for them to be able to talk about the things that they're concerned about and the way they failed and the way they haven't lived up to their expectations, so that then they realize that like that type of stuff is not the protection. The protection are the relationships you make, and and honestly, we're all gonna die one day, right? Like there's kind of this idea that like I can preserve everything and everything perfect and preserve my life if I do X, Y, Z. But I think if perfectionists are surrounded by people who, instead of unvalidating them, say things like, yeah, like that's scary, or yeah, you screwed up. That's okay. Like we all screw up. Like they can share their imperfections with people around them. She doesn't give a ton of advice about it. But I do think we live in a society where perfectionism is so valued. It's what she calls, and this is what Carol Dweck calls it, instead of a learning environment, it's a performance environment, right? Growth versus fit. So like if we live in such a performance environment our whole life, where getting an A is important and making X amount of money is important and looking a certain way is important and having a house that looks a certain way is important. Who are we to like shame those people for becoming a perfectionist? Most of them were literally like trained to be that way in some way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yep.
it's just something, I don't know. She doesn't give, I don't feel like I answered your question to your satisfaction. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. The other question was, it seems like perfectionists, at least in my limited experience, have a hard time starting something because they're afraid to fail.
Yeah.
So she must, I mean, does she address like don't be afraid to fail? I mean, that sounds so simple, but I'm assuming that's
Oh,
kind of what the whole book is about, right? Is how
yeah.
not to be afraid to fail on purpose
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I would highly recommend this book to people who consider themselves perfectionists because
Okay.
for me, I had already bought into the idea that perfectionism is one futile. Like, because where do you end?
Right.
Where is your best? That doesn't even exist. That's not even a thing, right? But so and also like I'm a type B personality. I'm not a type A personality, whatever that means. I just don't care as much about stuff like that. So I already bought in. So for me, the book wasn't as much a buy-in. It was more like a great detailing of like the ways to be dumb and make mistakes. I had already bought into being dumb and making mistakes. Now she just taught me like better ways to do it, right?
Right.
Like I think for people who haven't bought into it, like this would be a good book, or even like Carol Dweck's growth mindset stuff. But I think this would be a good book for people who maybe want to feel a little more free about trying new things and making mistakes and knowing that that's just part of the human condition. And part of the reason they might not feel that is because they're raised in a society that doesn't really honor and value that. And we're really quick to like place blame. She talks about this a lot in the book. We're really quick to be like, oh, there's been a meltdown of da da da. We're really quick to blame someone, right? And usually it's the person at the head, it's the coach, it's the pilot, it's the company. But when you look down into the systems, it usually is kind of like a blameless mistake. And I think when people are used to living in this world where like blame is the thing and also it's just like the way our brains work. We're
Right.
really quick to be like, I don't want to take blame for that because it's like social safety is part of our survival as a species, right? So I think this would be a good entry point for people who want to learn about like just the general idea of how this is part of our world, whether we want to talk about it or not. All of us are doing this. All of us are screwing up every day.
That's for sure.
Speak for yourself. I
Most of us have not reached the perfection, but that feels like a perfectionist thing to say. So now
mean, totally it was. I have so many thoughts. One of the things that you're reminding me of, there's this Navy SEAL commander, and he talked about one of his right hand person when they were out in the field. I think they were in Iraq. He would always come. He had this guy that would come to him and say, "Hey, the Humvees, like the ones that we ordered, they got the order wrong." And he would say, "Good. That means that we'll be better mechanics." And he'd come the next day and say, our plans totally got scrapped. He'd say, good, that just gives us more time to plan for the next mission. And you're reminding me of that as a leader. I work with some younger individuals that were developing and growing and kind of having that mindset when things go wrong, to not have that reflex as a leader to be like, oh, yo, why, why did that happen? Or why are you doing this? But just to chill out a little bit and say, awesome, let's go to work solving the problem. I mean, does she give any ideas in the book as a leader how to create that Toyota culture? Like, hey, when things go wrong, let's just address it immediately rather than covering it and it blows up in our face even bigger down the road. I don't know if she gives any like leadership techniques or thoughts around how to create the culture.
Yeah, like you should read this book. Like the story you told could have been a story in the book. There's a
Okay.
lot about leadership. She talks a lot about, she gives us one anecdote or study or something where she's talking about she talks a lot about high stakes situations like being a pilot or being a cardiologist or, stuff like that. But anyway, there was a new procedure to do heart surgery where they wouldn't have to like cut through the sternum, but it was really, really difficult because it required that the surgeon give up a lot of control to the other people in the room. So everybody on the team, in order for it to work, if any person on the team saw anything, they had to be able to talk to that surgeon and say like, this is going wrong. And I think or Amy Edmondson herself did this study. She wanted to see the success of it, like which teams were successful and which teams weren't. And the team that was successful, take a guess how it was different. I'm making you do work. I'm sorry, should I not?
No, you can totally make this work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that the surgeon has to be somebody who is approachable and not pompous, somebody who's willing to take feedback. I don't know if that's somebody who's been working with the team a long time, but that's what I imagine. I used to work in the dental field, and I was always nervous to talk to train dentists how to use this equipment, and it took me a while, but I finally realized, hey, I'm the expert at least on this equipment. They might be the expert at all the other stuff with dental work, but I at least know what I'm talking about here. So I don't know. Maybe it's just somebody who is more a kind of a humble surgeon that was willing to listen to feedback. That's my guess.
Less ego.
100%. 100%. It had less to do with, it had like, it was not correlated at all with like level of expertise and experience. It was correlated 100% with what she calls leadership. And then of course she goes into great detail in the book about not only like some tips and tricks and techniques for leaders to develop that culture, but also just like the mindset and like the emotional state of the leader being very, very important. She gives this little set of advice. I wrote down a page. Hold on. She gives lots of lists and charts, and it's all super listy and charty.
So get the book if you like lists and charts.
I just bought the audiobook actually just now, so that's going to be interesting.
Half the book is charts, Matt.
Good. Well, it'll be faster listen then.
One of the things I really liked was she told leaders of teams that were trying to like move towards a team that had this psychological safety element where people, but also she talks a lot about, because people get this knee-jerk reaction like, oh, if we just make failure like the name of the game and everybody feels free to fail, then we are reducing our expectations. And she speaks to that as, yes, there are low expectation environments, and that's a different issue because she has seen low expectation and low psychological safety, and she's seen low expectation and high psychological. She's seen all four parts, and she draws a cute little diagram, right? So she's talking about, like, of course, the ideal is high expectation and high psychological safety environment. And she says two simple, oh no, this isn't the one. Hold on. I know I'm in a podcast setting, but I want to find this list. I pulled up the wrong list.
No problem at all.
The wrong list.
Well, it's interesting because I think over my career, there have been people that are like, they fail, they make a mistake, and they're like, yeah, whatever, not a big deal, it's fine. And you're like, it is a big deal. It's not fine. Like, we need to fix the problem. So it's interesting to think about having the safety there to like report failure, but also that everyone has an expectation to progress.
And it's funny because she talks about, I can't find the list, I'll think about it. She talks about like how in some ways, done correctly, the atmosphere of being able to speak about your failure creates higher expectations, because the reason we want employees and kids and students to talk about what's going wrong is because we want to be part of the process of helping them like learn from whatever that mistake was, right? Like nobody wants, like, in fact, it seemed to me, the way she wrote about it, it seemed more highly correlated that it was psychologically safe to admit failure, and there were high expectations, because no boss no boss or no teacher or no parent who is going to not care about the product they're making or the child they're raising is, what am I trying to say? I said like a double negative. I'm basically saying, like, I want my kid to come to me if they've made a failure, because I want to be part of the process of them learning from that. If my kid comes to me with a failure and I don't care about that process, I'm going to be angry, and I'm actually going to create like lower psychological safety. So it does seem to be correlated that psychological safety leads to people talking about the error and working towards fixing it. And she does talk about this idea of, she calls it, we have all these, sometimes in complex systems, we have these warning signs, and sometimes people actually turn off or turn down that warning sign by saying things like what you said, by saying like, it's no big deal, don't worry about it. One of the things she talks about a lot is like, if we have an intuition that something's going wrong and we knee-jerk reaction, say, it's don't worry about it, over and over and over again, a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, chances are one of those was a warning sign and you should have paid attention to it. So actually, like, admitting failure is kind of opposite of what that person did. When that person said it's no big deal, they didn't take any accountability. They didn't realize they didn't talk about how it happened. They were actually what she calls failure of, they had a aversion to talking about failure, right? If I say everything's okay, an aversion of talking about the failure that happened. So it's kind of like this interesting thing, because I think people jump to that conclusion, like, oh, well, if it's just all okay, who cares? There's no standards. No, talking about failure is an admittance that something has gone wrong in the system and you are part of it. She talks a lot about apologizing. I think all men should read this book.
Agreed. It's true. Okay, so we always, and you kind of talked about this already, but we always try to apply what we learn, right, from these books. What is something that you have applied or want to apply, and then give us your rating of the book?
Okay. I told my kids are in the house, and I told them to go watch a show because I don't want them to know all my little psychology tricks I'm doing on them.
Smart.
Hopefully they listen to the podcast then.
Two things. I already copied a page of this book where she talks about when you do make a failure, when you make a failure, when you do have a failure, how can you start to learn from that? And she calls it stop, challenge, and choose, or something like that. And I copied off that page and I gave it to my students today because we were talking about growth mindset a little bit. But I would say I've had two big mind shifts, and I'll just tell you about one of them. One of my big mind shifts from this book has been, I have my third up and coming teenager. He's 12, almost 13. And I've done this 2 times before, and I think I made a lot of mistakes. I think I had a lot of failures. And instead of being averse to that over the past couple of years, I've been trying to learn from that. And now I have 2 other kids coming. I'm like, I get a second shot. So my 12-year-old got really, really angry at her brother the other day. And of course was like railing on him and overwhelmed with how angry she was. And then when I went up to talk to her, she said some really mean things to me, because that's just because I'm there, right? And I'm the one just trying to help out the situation, and she's agitated. And later, after she calmed down, she profusely apologized. And I said this to her and I meant it, and it came from this book. Like, the ideology of it came from the book. I said, this is a really good place for you to make some interpersonal mistakes. I said, because I'm very safe. Like, yes, you have to be held accountable for your behavior. She was accountable for what she did and what she said. But at the same time, I wanted her to know that, like, it wasn't the end of the world if she made these mistakes in context of doing or saying something like that to her mom, because because we could work through it together, and I could talk with her about like, okay, one day when you have roommates or when you at school, when you have friends or you have teachers, like how could you do this differently? And she could learn from the mistakes she made as a parent. So I think one of the things I've shifted is when my kids are making errors around me, and some of them might feel personal and I might have the knee-jerk reaction to get defensive, it's actually a really good place for them to make that mistake. And instead of either getting so mad or brushing it under the rug, I can do that middle ground thing where I say, this is a mistake. You're in a safe context right now, but you need to learn how to not keep making this mistake because you're not always going to be in a safe context,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And it's really kind of helped me reframe that a little bit with my, especially like my teenagers.
Interesting. All right. What do you rate the book? We go single, double, triple, home run, grand slam, fly out. Anything you want that's baseball terminology related, we'll accept, and then we'll do a little game summary to kind of summarize what you talked about. So what do you rate the book?
Okay, I'm gonna rate the book to like a second.
A double.
I get 2 bases and maybe like 1 runner got in. That's what
Okay,
I'm
so
doing.
an RBI, an RBI double, an RBI double. We have
An
not had that
RBI
rating.
double.
RBI
Well,
double.
good books. I read a lot of good books. And the
Yeah.
reason I rated that is because I didn't have a major paradigm shift in reading it. I already had those paradigm shifts reading other books leading up to this. This was supplemental to that paradigm shift. Do you ever like get a feeling or an idea that something would be good to do, but you don't know how to do it in detail? I kind of felt like this was something I wanted to do. I wanted to do it better. I already had some tricks up my sleeve, but like this helped give me some more. It gave me a little more. It like boosted me. It
Got it.
boosted me.
Yeah, got it. You got the person on second base, and somebody else went home. RBI stand up double. I love it. This is great. It's a great rating.
That is a good rating.
Yeah. So
It's
the
just
game,
getting a double is not a big deal, but when you get an RBI,
yeah, when you get an
that's a
RBI
big
double,
deal.
that is better for sure, for sure.
The RBI are like all the people in my life who will benefit from me reading this.
Yeah,
exactly. No, exactly.
Just playing 3D chess on our rating
yeah.
system here, Matt.
No, it's good. I like it. This is very good. Our rating system is very precise, so it's very important. All right, so game summary. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Rachel.
I said I thought very carefully about it.
No, I love it. It's I'm not. I mean, we're laughing, but I love the analogy. All right, Zach, you want to do the game summary? What you want to summarize the book?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is just creating a culture at home, at work, striving for you want to strive for excellence, you want to progress, but you don't want other people to think that's all that matters. You want them to feel like, you know what, we're all trying to grow, we're trying to get better. And for me to do that, I need to be able to talk about what just went wrong in a place where everyone's okay with that. And actually it's refreshing when somebody says, hey, I messed up. Can you help me with this project, or can you help me improve? So I think I'm coming away with how can I do that better at home? And just as an example, my daughter called me last night. When she calls home and talks to my wife, everything's good. But when she calls me, something's wrong with the car. So when my phone rings and she's on the other end, it's usually something's wrong with the car. And as we were FaceTiming, I could just see the fear in her face, like dad is gonna be mad, or she was just really nervous. And I was like, it's okay. We spent an hour on FaceTime. She's 3 hours away in another town. I couldn't just jump in her car and fix it for her. And so we worked through it. We got her car up and running, taught her how to jump it remotely, and she changed the battery in her key fob, which was the issue. So I'm just kind of thinking about how to be more iterating focused, like let's just kind of move through it, but also make people know it's totally okay. If you find something, say something, and let's work on it together. So that's what I'm coming from this conversation with.
And I'm going to add that what I took a little bit away from that is not just in personal relationships and business, but probably the systems of the business Rachel talked about. It reminds me of a story back in my dental days when I was shipping a product to this really big lab, and we had to ship it at a certain time, and my boss had just sold them like, okay, everything's going great. We get this particular order every single Monday or whatever, and he just sold more to them, and so he was super excited and comes over like, oh yeah, cool, we just sold this is awesome. Did you ship their normal order? And it was like 4:05, and I had to ship it by like 4. And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot. This is like we had just like signed the deal, and I had messed up the one important thing. And so luckily, they were able to call and get it shipped out on time, and it worked out. But you can bet that I never ever messed up again on that particular company's order. So it was a mistake, and it wasn't necessarily system, but like it kind of made me reevaluate my own personal system, like making sure I remember things. And that's kind of what this reminded me of. Is it's not just your own personal stuff and stuff that you can work on, but something that that systematically might be an issue, kind of like the Toyota thing you talked about as well. So that's my 2 cents. Rachel, that was really awesome. Thanks for coming on. So it was so great to have you. I love your energy and the positivity, and we definitely need to have you again. So that was great. Thanks for coming on.
I have to shout out to Tiffany, who might be one of your like many viewers, listeners. You might not know her, but it's my friend Tiffany.
Okay.
I don't even know if my wife listens to this podcast. We'll see. It'll be an Easter egg for her.
Yeah. You can listen to mine. That's why I'm shouting out for her.
That was a great pitch.
Okay, yeah. Awesome, so sorry, you have a podcast that we need to hear about. Is that what I just heard?
Well, that made it seem like this was like the zeitgeist. This was the milieu. Like everybody was doing this, and this was like not very. I don't know. He made me feel like it wasn't like very original, but I think it's original. Because I think just a podcast where people come on and they just vent, and we don't judge them. We're not even allowed to really even talk back to them. They just vent. And are there rules? I think no. I feel done with rules. Like, are we going to get in trouble? Yes, for sure. Like, it's not going to be picked up by like the liberal media or the conservative media. Like, no one's going to pick it up. It's gonna, but I just like sometimes, because I am like a single person and it's me and my kids when I am with somebody, it's like sometimes I just have to call up people and say, this is not your role in my life, but who else am I gonna call? And I just feel like a podcast where you could do that would be really great.
And like you said, they might pay you to come on. I mean, that's the revenue model.
Yeah, they pay us to come on. Like it's like therapy, but like the whole world gets to hear. If you will.
Yeah, that'd be entertaining for sure.
The whole world, probably no one. You two are great. Thanks for inviting me on. That was fun.
We appreciate it, Rachel. Teacher Rachel, thank you so much. And we'll catch you on the next Pitch Book podcast.